I kind of had this chip on my shoulder. I'm like, I'm quote unquote solopreneur. And then I realized even a solopreneur needs systems and that what I built was not sustainable. If I get hit by a bus, it has no enterprise value for my family. This is not a responsible way to continue forward.
So big question then. Let's say tomorrow the reset button is hit, everything is gone and you have to start over. What is the one system that you put in place for the next 30 days to start growing again?
It's definitely some form of I think it's a perfect combination of top of funnel awareness, the ability to build know, like, and trust that you need in marketing, and people often engage and buy, right? So it's bottom of funnel as well. That's kind of the X factor in this. That's how we got into Walmart. That's how we generate 6 figures from one interview. It's not the direct response or the evergreen. It's the that actually makes it so powerful.
If you can take that, what Dustin's done, and apply it into your business, you are literally going to be ahead of $700 million SaaS companies. That realization is huge. Okay, Dustin, awesome to chat with you. I gotta say, I'm interested to hear first a little bit about how the transition went from getting a master's in civil engineering to marketing to now teaching podcast guesting as a growth strategy. What was the bridge between those two?
Oh, well, thank you for having me, Elliott. Yeah, there's a few stops along the way, including marriage ministry and meat sticks. So I'll make this brief, but yeah, I had a 17-year career in traffic engineering, but not like website traffic, like, cars. And was very happy with that career, but I always had an entrepreneurial itch to scratch. And so I was always kind of doing side businesses. And my wife and I had some marriage ministry work we were doing in our local community. And kind of my big push was to create a website around that and start writing about that, wrote a book about that. That pulled me really deep into digital marketing. And then I started doing some marketing consulting work on the side of the engineering career. And so I did that concurrently for probably too long, like 6 or 7 years. And in 2018, I stepped away from engineering, pulled myself fully into self-employment was how I would categorize that at that point. Was serving a bunch of different clients doing marketing work, ended up forming a partnership with one of them and launched a consumer packaged good called Fire Creek Snacks, which is the meat sticks part of this chapter. The meat sticks business was successful and taught me a ton about different sales and marketing ideas, and started doing trade shows and things like that. Then COVID happened. Everything kind of burnt to the ground immediately with all my local business clients were shut down. I was traveling to a trade show to promote Fire Creek Snacks, and it was canceled as I was driving there. And so I came home sort of tail between my legs, like, what in the world am I going to do? And so I got on a podcast as a guest in summer 2020 to tell the story of Fire Creek Snacks and see if we could gain some traction sitting at this computer from my home, because I couldn't travel and sample and do the things that we were doing. And so that was a huge inflection point. For a couple of years, that became the primary marketing mechanism for Fire Creek Snacks. We built a ton of relationships and got into Walmart and had a bunch of cool stories that came from that adventure. And then people started taking notice of that, and they're like, hey, Dustin, like, can you help me with this? And I was like, sure. And so I kind of tried on a new identity as a coach, starting in the middle of 2021. And fast forwarding to today, I have exited that partnership, kind of exited everything I was doing. And for the first time in my adult life, I have one business, one job, if you will, with 7-figure leap. And so, for the past 3 years, we have been helping entrepreneurs grow their brands using podcast guesting as a primary marketing and growth channel. And so, that kind of hopefully bridges the gap in a somewhat succinct way.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I think the cool thing there is that, people look at what you're doing now and they're like, oh, this guy's been doing podcasting for 20 years and that's why this is working out and he's teaching it. But I think it's cool to see the side hustles that kind of bridge things. And then you went from engineering to marketing. Yep. And then sort of fell into the next stage as well. I think we have this idea as entrepreneurs that to be successful, it's kind of like this trajectory. Mm-hmm. And that's what everyone else's journey is as well. And sometimes it's not. It's very organic. You try a bunch of side hustles, realize that this isn't how you want to do things, and then you end up coaching something that you never got trained on. It just is something that you've learned, valued, and loved.
It's a jagged line. And, in my case, sometimes that line ends up on a different graph, right? It's like you jump over, like I'm building and building and building an engineering career. And then it's like, oh, well, now all of a sudden I'm an online business person. And now all of a sudden I'm a consultant. And now I'm a partner in a physical product doing e-commerce and trade shows. And now I'm doing podcast guesting. Now, the reality is, in hindsight, there's definitely through lines between a lot of those, iterations of my career. Of course, facilitation, uh, empathy, relationship building. There's a lot of things that I started doing early in my engineering career that are serving me very well now as like a full-time online entrepreneur. Could never have predicted it in advance, but through like God's providence, I got put in this path and this journey, and now I can look in the rearview mirror and kind of see the logic behind how some of these things actually tie together.
Yeah, that's very cool. I feel like that experience as well gives you a lot of leverage for what you're doing now because it all feeds into making the program a success.
Yeah.
So if you're just starting something new yourself and this is not what your experience or training is, you didn't go to university for it, do not sweat it. This could be the organic progression that leads you to build something like Dustin has with 7-Figure Leap. Here's the question then, Dustin. What is the biggest system right now that is currently building the business at the stage you're at today?
The way I like to think about systems, and this is something I really embarked on in a big way about 18 months ago, as I sort of hustled my way up to a certain point and was doing all the things and, literally building a whole business on Post-it notes and my own brain bandwidth. I started to really understand and embrace the idea that I really do need systems. And so the way I think about it now is basically every business has certain functions, like whether you're brand new or you're a Fortune 500 company, everything really comes down to marketing, sales, fulfillment. Some people might call that operations, but like fulfilling the promise of your program, admin slash, kind of internal operations, and like finances, right? It's kind of like the 5 pieces of every business. And so I've strived in a big way to kind of build at least the beginnings of systems for each of those. And so I think about them as like, where do my marketing and sales efforts live? Where does my customer fulfillment live? Where do my internal admin operations live? And so, I've got platforms for each of those at this point. Some of those platforms I still quote unquote own. Some I've now developed a small team and they can own different parts. But the idea is if these things exist sort of in silos on different platforms, then I can, ultimately sit in the middle of those and be the puppet master or the person that ties it together as the CEO and founder and leader, but I don't have to own every piece of it. And so like sales and marketing, we use Go High Level. For fulfillment, we've centralized everything on Circle. For our internal admin stuff, we use ClickUp. And then for finances, we just use QuickBooks. So I think about them as platforms and sort of independent systems that different people can own. And then, what are the connecting points? What are the pieces of those that I need to have influence on and sort of a dashboard to understand what's going on big picture. So that's a snapshot where we're at today. 2.5 years ago, none of that existed. And about 18 months ago, the first piece of it started to exist. And so this is you're really catching me at a point in the evolution where I feel really good about where we're at. And we're now set for, future growth, but certainly didn't start there.
Oh, I love that. So, okay, so you're like me, a systems guy where the pieces of the puzzle all come together, but that's not where you begin. You got to get the corner pieces first and then sort of build inwards. So you have broken out the systems for your business into, I don't want to say silos, but you've broken them out into separate systems where someone can run them with autonomy, but they all connect in the business. So they can have expertise in one thing without having to know exactly what's going on with everything else. That's really smart. Having that kind of, should we call it systems stacking? Would you agree that that's accurate?
I think that's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Okay. So having that kind of system stacking then, do you find that has given you more scale ability, more scale potential in your business? Or has that been a limiting factor as you grow?
I think it definitely sets the foundation for more scale. And while building these different systems out, it required a pause in growth, right? Like going from literally doing everything bootstrapped and through sheer effort and will and hours and, and hustle, I guess you could say, you build things to a certain point and then they become unsustainable because you're trying to juggle these 5 balls, right? And at some point something's going to fall if you don't have support for it. And so I was resistant for a long time, the idea of like having a team at all. I came out of this engineering career and this is part of what that starts to color today, right? Like I was managing 20 people. I built an entire department inside of the second company I worked for. And I really grew to resent that. Like there's a reason, like, hey, you're a really good engineer. You're really good at what you do. Now go be a manager and deal with all this stuff with, human resources and people's drama. And so I kind of had this chip on my shoulder. I'm like, I'm a quote unquote solopreneur. And that worked really well to a point. And then I realized that even a solopreneur needs systems, and that what I built was not sustainable. It was not really an asset. If I get hit by a bus, it has no enterprise value for my family. Like this is not a responsible way to continue forward. So I kind of hit the pause button in the sense of trying to really keep pushing growth. And I've said, you know what, I'm going to invest my time, money, and energy into building some of these systems. And so obviously you got to prioritize that, and you got to do it in an order that makes sense for where you're feeling most constrained. But yeah, as we sit here now, like, I think what's important to point out is those kind of 5 pieces of the business, which I think of as 5 independent but connected systems, 5 platforms. They really also correspond to an organizational chart, right? And so right now I am the head of sales and marketing, but I can easily see having a director of marketing and a head of sales, because those org chart positions correspond with a system that I've built and invested in, right? And like, we've already got someone who handles the customer service. I have a client success manager, and she kind of owns the circle experience for our clients, as an example. And so that org chart is a work in progress, but it is there. I can see clearly where it's going. And so I can see, how you go from a $0 business to a 50,000 business to a 500 to a million, and, which is kind of where we've gotten. But I can see the path to like a 3, 5, $10 million business should I want that. And it's just an expansion of this team and org chart around these systems. So hopefully that was not too thorough of an answer, but that's the big picture of how I see these things tying together and setting a foundation for future growth.
Actually, I think that's pretty amazing that you've been able to do that so early on as a solo founder, realizing that you need that. Because I feel like on both sides of this, early on, there's a ton of entrepreneurs right now building on social media, wanting to do the solo founder creator journey. And they've yet to have that realization that I have to treat this like a business.
Yes.
I have to build those systems to stack to build a real business. And that, I think, mental transformation really makes you approach it very differently, because I feel like a lot of social channels, they kind of set their own rules as to what they require from you, but that doesn't necessarily build your business. It just means you're creating content, which is good reps to put in. But on the other side of this, for bigger companies that grow, so a few years back, I was working for a $150 million global brand as their VP of marketing. And I would have to work with big SaaS companies and bring in our tech stack and our own technologies for programs and systems. And I would interview them as to like the challenges they have faced as they've grown. And I really just wanted to understand, as a $300 or a $700 million company, what were the challenges you had in growing? How did you overcome them? Just from my own education. And funnily enough, they all said the same thing. We got to this point where we couldn't scale our systems. Everyone was just bottoming out at this level that they couldn't get through. And so that some of them took 6 weeks off to review all of their system stacks. And for one of the managers I was dealing with, it actually doubled her workload. She was dealing with like 50 enterprise clients a day and then was doing 100, just because they changed the way teams communicated and integrated through a tech program.
Wow.
So I feel like having that realization so early on as a solo founder and actually building your business with that foundation is a huge unlock. If you're a new founder, new creator, you're a couple of years into your business, if you can take what Dustin's done and apply it into your business, you are literally going to be ahead of $700 million SaaS companies. That realization is huge. Yeah, amazing. I have no doubt that is one of the big reasons why you've built something that is having such success and is getting such engagement. And I'll have to tell you, actually, Dustin, it was your interview with Nathan at Kit a couple of months ago that has created this, because I watched it as you broke down podcast guesting as a growth strategy. And as you unpacked that, I just sat there kicking myself, because I'm just thinking why am I not doing this? Like, there's that much value in it. I've actually never considered that as a strategy. I always thought long-term evergreen content YouTube would be valuable, but seeing the business strategy for it, that was a big unlock. And so I just sat there afterwards and I'm like, oh man, I've got to do this. That's where this has come from. But those systems and building like a real company, that is the key. Whatever your creator entrepreneurial journey is, eventually you're like, okay, I got to take this seriously.
Yeah. And if I may, I think something important to point out, we grew really fast. So like 2.5 years, like I said, we scaled pretty fast, in relative terms, right? From a literally starting from a point of zero, to something fairly substantial. And I think what's important, what I would even do differently now is even on, that once you've got some kind of proof of concept, you're like, yeah, this is something I'm committed to and this is something I'm going to run with. You don't need to build the team, but I think it's really important to just try on an identity. Like, hey, this year maybe I'll do $10,000 with this side hustle, but what if this was $1 million business? What would be required for that to be true? And build out sort of a phantom organizational chart, right? It's going to kind of have these 5 building blocks because they all do, but it could be more sophisticated. It could be much more simple. And the reality is your name will probably be the head of every one of these quote unquote departments or these systems. And that's totally great because what that will allow you to do is have a vision for when I can afford it and when I have the bandwidth, the first thing I'm going to get is someone to help me with this or a system that will help me address this, even if it's still you running it and owning it. Having that clarity of like where this is going to go, right, is super important. And so that's an exercise I went through and got some coaching on. It really unlocked this idea of like someone challenged me to like, what if this was a $10 million business? Like you've scaled up to this point, you're kind of like maxed out. What would have to be true for Dustin to be the CEO of a $10 million business? And I still don't know that I want a $10 million business. That's not the point. The point was though, going through the exercise of what would need to be true for that. Then I could really identify what are the parts that I do love. What's the part I would never give up? What's the part that I always want to have my fingers in because I love it? And what are the parts that, man, if I could wave a wand and get help, I would. That really starts to get you clarity on how you want to build the business of your dreams, because we all have our own businesses, especially as creators. Like that's a realization I had was I thought I was burnt out when I hit some of these caps. I was really just bored because I realized that I had solved the problem I set out to solve for my business. And I was like, oh, wait, there's whole different levels of problems that I can use my creativity to address. And that's really been freeing and it's really opened up my eyes to new opportunities and new levels of growth. So just want to kind of speak to those listening. They're like, hey, I'm like doing it all. Like that's you will. But allow yourself the freedom to dream a little bit about how this could build out over time. And that's going to give you a lot more momentum versus just sitting there trying to keep it all in your brain, which is what I did for too long.
Yeah, so true. That was the same for me as well with different side businesses I built. I think for a lot of the time I was thinking too small, and I run through this framework like this in my coaching program, but basically we reverse engineer the goals. So,
Yeah.
you talk to a creator and they're like, oh, I want to build this. And they've limited themselves right there here. So, if we do this when we go on vacation, you plug in the destination and then it gives you the roadmap to get there. And I feel like in business, we don't do that. We limit ourselves. They're like, oh, I want to build a shed. And it's like, great. And then you stop short and it don't quite get there. You plan to build a luxury home, you might also end up with a shed too, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
But you've got to set the goals a little higher because the reverse engineering roadmap gives you the path on how to get there and all of the obstacles you have to overcome, which then builds your strategy. Yeah. It's why Google does moonshots, aim high, because even if you don't get all the way there, you've still built something really effective that will work.
Yep.
Okay. So big question then. Let's say tomorrow the reset button is hit, everything is gone and you have to start over. What is the one system that you put in place for the next 30 days to start growing again?
Yeah, it's definitely some form of what I would call a growth flywheel. So something on the marketing sales side, because ultimately the fuel to your business is revenue, right? And so how do you do that in a way that gets you immediate results and is building for the long term? And so I really like to think of this in terms of flywheels. This is something I've studied with Nathan Barry, who you mentioned I did that interview with. And that was sort of the central theme of that particular interview, is how I've built this one key flywheel in my business, which for me is podcast guesting. I think podcast guesting, if people have an online business, is kind of a universally available flywheel. Now, it doesn't mean everyone wants to do that, but if you have a story to tell, you have things you like to teach and coach, the people that we love to work with say things like, man, I'm like really good. I'm really passionate about the thing that I do, but I'm just not really good at marketing. And my encouragement to that and the answer to this question is make your marketing a version of the thing you already love to do, right? And so for me, I love to teach and coach and tell stories and share case studies and those sort of things. It's just like how I like to do what I do for fun, right? It's like I read books about this stuff. And so I just make that my marketing by doing things like this, being interviewed and sharing my expertise with other people's audiences to then draw those folks into me. And that becomes the basis for sales and marketing and generating the revenue and the relationships to then grow the business beyond. So yeah, if I started over, and I meet a lot of people who are either just starting or they've kind of got that initial product market fit, but they don't know how to get out of the dependence on direct referrals. Like that's the only way they generate business is when someone comes to them or someone introduces them. I'm like, hey, you need a growth flywheel, and we can break down kind of the components and how that works. But that would be that's the answer, is like some sort of thing that you actually enjoy doing that generates momentum in your business, particularly for sales and marketing. And so that same growth flywheel as podcast guesting is what I use for the Fire Freak Snacks business. It's what I've used for this business. So when you say, what if you had to start over? I have, and that is what I've built again because I saw it work so well in the other business.
Very cool. So I have a bunch of questions here from that. So first one, would you say you view podcast guesting as evergreen content, or is that just being used as discoverability short term?
It's a unique mechanism, I guess you could say. It's a unique platform because it is pieces of all of that. I actually had a really cool interview recently with Alan Dibb. He wrote this book, The One-Page Marketing Plan. And he kind of challenged me. He's like, oh, podcast guesting, it's very middle of funnel. So if anyone has like some kind of marketing background, traditionally we think in terms of funnels where it's like awareness and we get people, they know us and like us, and eventually they trust us enough to fall out the bottom and hopefully become a customer or disappear. And his experience with this was, people find me from all the other stuff I do. And then they go, after they're already aware and they want to understand and trust me more, then they go search for me and they find me a podcast interview. They listen to that, and all of a sudden now it goes from middle of funnel to bottom of funnel. I'm like, true. But it's also a way to build awareness in the first place, right? Like someone listening to this might be the first time they ever heard of me. But in this one sitting, they can both get to know me, they can learn from me, and hopefully develop some level of trust that I know something about something that could help them, right? And then even from a single interview, the Nathan interview, and we've had a dozen clients come from that, and like high ticket, really valuable clients from one interview. And most of them had never heard of me before that interview. Right. And so it is, I think it's the reason I focus on it so much. I think it's kind of a pretty perfect combination of top of funnel awareness, the ability to build know, like, and trust, the conversion sort of juice that you need in marketing. And people often come out from one interview with a very with a lot of solution awareness and desire to actually like engage and buy, right? So it's bottom of funnel as well. And so, but also it's generating evergreen content. It's generating content you can repurpose. It's got a long tail effect because these interviews last a long time. They generate backlinks for SEO. Like I could obviously go on and on. But I would say the reason I like podcast guesting the most of different marketing channels is all of the stuff that you would expect, like marketing stuff, right? Like direct response marketing, evergreen marketing, the content marketing stuff I said. But what it is really special, the reason it's really special is it's actually a way to build high quality relationships at scale, right? It's not only generating the assets that you need for marketing, like you do with paid ads, SEO, content, whatever, social media, it's doing that, but it also has this human to human factor that is, I think, unreplaceable in other formats because you're building a relationship with the host, with the audience, with the other guests. And so that's kind of the X factor in this, that's how we got into Walmart, for Fire Freak. That's how, we generate 6 figures from one interview. It's not the direct response or the evergreen. It's the human element that actually makes it so powerful.
Oh, that's huge. I think we need to pause and highlight that for a second, the genius of it, because the next question was going to be why flywheels instead of funnels? But
Yeah.
you kind of just answered that because you can't have content that is top, middle, and bottom of funnel simultaneously and have a funnel work.
Yes.
Like I think podcast guesting totally transcends the whole funnel setup. And that's why the flywheels work, because then you're pulling someone into your content ecosystem. And that has so much more power than funneling people tons in the top to just get a few clients at the bottom. That's not a system. That's a treadmill. A system that you constantly have to feed isn't a system, it's a monster. And
the simple analogy, I think if someone's like, what the hell are they talking about with funnels or whatever? The simple analogy here is like a funnel. Think of it like a slide, right? Like every person has to climb to the top and then they slide to the bottom and then they're gone. And the new person comes to the top So think of paid ads. Someone sees it, they're like, it distracts them for a moment. They click on it, they go watch a video, they get on the email, and it's just this whole thing that they have to go through this journey to build a relationship enough to maybe transact at the bottom of the slide. A flywheel is a merry-go-round, right? So you jump on it, or you have your potential clients jump on it, right? And like think of a bunch of kids on a merry-go-round. They're illegal now because they're a death trap. But you get on there and you spin this thing with a bunch of kids. They fly off. But the idea is like, hey, everyone gets on the merry-go-round, the flywheel. And the first time I turn that thing, it is hard to do. It's harder than getting up to the top of the slide and falling down. But the second time is easier. The third time is easier. And eventually what you've built is momentum, right? And so this thing, you can spin it with your finger and it just keeps generating momentum. That's what you want to build. When I say flywheel, it is a circle, and it is a loop that is it has a closing element to where it's a closed system. In other words, right? To put my engineering hat on, it's a closed system that generates its own momentum, and you just need to pump a little fuel into it to keep it spinning. A funnel, you pour stuff in the top and it dumps out the bottom and it's done, right? And so you want to take the bottom of the funnel, connect it back to the top, and that creates a flywheel. Just to make this very simple for people, when you say flywheel versus funnel, yeah, and then podcast guesting is a flywheel. There's lots of different flywheels you can build. But for marketing, I think podcast guesting is a very special flywheel for for the reasons that we've talked about.
And I think it's huge because, and I hate funnels. I talk about this with my coaching clients, fundamentally disagree with the entire concept. We'll get into that another time. But, it's kind of ruined marketing as a whole because, there's a ton of agencies that are now just focusing on all of this volume to funnel in the top and then filter down to the few clients at the bottom. Whereas with a flywheel, you can really focus on the quality and the relationships that you're building and have them continue engaging even if they don't purchase right away. And there is so much more weight and value in that for a business than just focusing on this huge, wide audience. And I feel like that's really where business building is going for creators and solo founders, is the quality over the quantity.
Yes.
You've kind of seen that in your business already, haven't you?
Yeah, I said that 3 times on 3 different calls yesterday. Is like, the approach I recommend and I use and we teach is very much quality over quantity, right? And I think in a world, it's a whole nother episode for a different day, of AI and depersonalization and all this stuff, like quality is definitely king. And when you have a flywheel, there's a network effect in there too, so that like client 10 is getting more value than client 2, and client 20 is getting more value than client 10, because they're in an ecosystem where they're serving each other while we're serving them. So again, there's some nuance to this, but yeah, I mean, the short answer is quality over quantity. To me, has always been the way, but I think it went from being a nice to have to a must have. I think it's like that's how you have to do business now online. It's just way too noisy. It's way too polluted in a way that like if you try to go out and do a traditional sales funnel that might have actually worked 10, 15 years ago, it just doesn't work. And so the solution that was better anyway is a flywheel approach.
Okay, so let's build like a 3-point flywheel. You've got to get started again. Are you building it through social channels, one specifically podcast guesting, and then a landing page for your offer? How would you structure it really simply to get started?
Yeah, really simply. Again, the whole flywheel can be centered on podcast guesting. So, you may have a question of like, how do I get the podcast guesting appearances, right? And so there's an element of relationship building to get the podcast guesting appearance. And then you want to capitalize on that podcast guesting appearance to feed the other kind of wedges around this wheel. I mean, this is a really simple answer to that. The system I build on and have built a flywheel is really like LinkedIn, podcast guesting, and email newsletter. Like that would be sort of the ultimate build out of this. And there's a lot that you can do with those 3 things. Is some social channel that fits your market and your personality. For me, I like LinkedIn, plus podcast guesting, plus an email list. Like that's really kind of the holy trinity when it comes to completing that flywheel. But you don't even have to, I had a lot of success with podcast guesting before I was ever on LinkedIn. And honestly, I had waited way too long to get serious about a newsletter. So I still was able to do a lot just with podcast guesting. But if you want to do it right, I would say some social channel like LinkedIn plus a podcast guesting plus a newsletter would be kind of the 3 pieces that I think are critical if you're going to do it right.
which is amazing because anybody can get started with
Yeah.
that without having to break the bank or have a long run up of education before they can jump in. So
All those things
yeah,
are
that's
free, and you
huge.
can have a kit account to help Nathan out here. You can have a kit account for free up to 10,000 subscribers. LinkedIn's free, and podcast casting's free. So, there's some sweat equity. You've got to learn an efficient way to do this, but you actually don't need to spend a bunch of money like you would trying to do paid ads or generate tons and tons of social media content or SEO or some of these things that really require a significant investment. That's one of the other things I like about podcast guesting is it's available to anyone. It does require some focus and expertise, but it doesn't cost money, which is a nice for people that are bootstrapping like I have multiple times.
Yeah, and it's huge because it also comes back down to the leverage that you get from doing that. And you mentioned a point there as well about choosing one that fits your personality. You've really got to pick content creation that is sustainable for you.
Yeah.
Maybe it is carousels and posts and writing a ton. Maybe it's just doing videos and
Yep.
podcasts. Whatever that looks like, if you can do it sustainably without burning out, that is where real businesses are built. And I think you are the perfect example of that you found this and it fits into all of the other experience you had from civil engineering to this. Yeah, amazing, Dustin. Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. I think that's probably unlocked a lot of opportunities for people watching. I know it has for me with this, and I think this is episode number 4 I've done so far.
Well,
And
congratulations. I'm
already
glad that
seeing,
I had some small part in inspiring you to do this experiment that's now caught a lot of momentum. And I know I'm going to point at this soon enough and be like, hey, I was in the first 5 of Elliott's guests. And he even mentioned, having some small role in inspiring it. Because I love the topic. I think it's critically important for people to set a long-term vision, but then get really practical about what can I do right now to move the needle. And I hope we've given some people some practical things they can do while, giving them maybe a taste of the bigger picture of what's possible with systems. Because I think it's so critical.
yeah, definitely. Me too. So if anyone listening wants to engage with more of what you've got going on or really learn how to use a business growth strategy and podcast guesting as a package to grow, where do they go, Dustin?
Yeah, it's real simple. So sevenfigureleap.com is our company. And if you do sevenfigureleap.com/start, we've got a really robust email course that's going to drip out and basically help you build a podcast guesting flywheel. Like, our business model is on helping people implement it and, coach them through it, but we give everything away for free. So if you're like, I'm kind of in a stage where I want to do it myself, you literally get every resource you need to just go build a podcast guesting flywheel on your own at no charge. And then if you're like, hey, I want to be part of this community, I want to go deeper, of course, that's how we actually, generate revenue. But yeah, sevenfigureleap.com/start. We'll give every secret away that people, if they want to do this super efficiently and get started right away.
And you should. Go and check it out. It's worth it. This could be the game changer you've been looking for. Dustin, thank you. This was awesome.
Yeah, you're awesome, Elliott. Thanks for having me.